Getting your podcast to stand out in the crowd is not easy. So how do you do it? How do you create a podcast that grabs the audience's attention and keeps them coming back for more episodes? It seems like a no-brainer, but choosing the right host or hosts can really make or break a podcast. Whatever the genre or style, your host needs to be confident, knowledgeable, and relatable. They need to be able to strike a nice balance between presenting the content naturally and sticking to a pre-planned structure to keep your audience engaged and interested. Having multiple hosts can also widen the appeal of your podcast by offering different personalities, thoughts, and opinions. It also encourages conversation, the golden ticket when it comes to engagement with your audience. It goes without saying that when it comes to podcasts, the sound quality of the voices being recorded can affect how the show will be received by your audience. If you want your podcast to sound professional and your hosts to sound crisp and clear, then you need to think about how you're recording them. It all starts with choosing the right mic, like I have right here. But it also means you need to think about your recording environment, mic placement and technique, and monitoring. For a more in-depth video on how you can get that pro podcast voice, check out the link in the description below. Listening to too much of the same thing can get tiring, and with so many other forms of content out there fighting for our attention, it can easily be the reason someone loses interest in a podcast. Finding different sources of audio to aid in delivering the message can keep your audience engaged by offering a palette of interesting sound textures throughout your show. Guest interviews, phone conversations, audio grabs, and even sound effects or voice effects can help, as long as they're used to reinforce your show's message rather than distract from it. While you might think that some of the best podcasts out there are left exactly as they were recorded, you need to think again. Most of, if not all, podcasts go through an editing and mixing process, usually by a dedicated audio producer. But there are some steps that even a solo producer can take to sculpt a show into something that audiences will find easier to listen to and be engaged with. Editing of a podcast can be split into two categories: editorial and technical. Editorial editing is where a producer cuts and stitches together content based on the purpose and message of the show to avoid waffle, unnecessary detail, or even just shorten the duration of the episode. Technical editing is when a producer cuts out fumbles, mistakes, retakes, unwanted noises, and sometimes restitches breaths back together to make sure it sounds natural after it's been edited. The purpose of both forms of editing is to deliver content that your audience wants to hear, keeping them engaged rather than getting distracted by long, unimportant passages or technical issues experienced in the recording. Next is the mixing process, where all the audio is then treated and processed to sound clearer, cleaner, and more balanced. An unmixed podcast may cause the message to get lost as unbalanced levels and unpleasant sounds can be distracting. Some simple level correction, EQ, compression, and de-essing can usually go a long way to keeping your audience focused on your content. An element that can take your podcast to the next level is the use of music. Having a catchy theme to intro and outro your shows is a good way to brand your podcast and make it more recognizable. Using music as a bed underneath voiceover elements can also really help to convey a certain emotion, the same way it does in movies and TV shows. There are two types of music you can use in your podcasts: original music and production music. Original music is where you pay a composer or a music artist directly for the rights to use their music. With their permission and a fee, you can either use something they've already written or even ask them to compose something unique for your podcast, like a theme or an audio logo. The cost of original music is usually higher, and custom-made music takes time, as the composer has to build a track from scratch. Commercial-released original music requires permission from the artist and any associated label or management, so it's best to steer clear of this kind of music, unless you intend to seek this permission. Production music is far easier to access, and there are many online platforms that offer extensive libraries of tracks to choose from. Again though, there are licensing costs and terms associated with using this music, so do your research before you start downloading tracks and putting them in your podcast. One final element that will bring up the production value of your podcast is meaningful sound design. Sound design is the use of various sound elements and production effects to create soundscapes you can use to enhance storytelling or brand your podcast. This can be anything from a stinger or a bumper, which can be used in between segments of your show, like this.
You're listening to another Road podcast.
I like that. To a realistic soundscape of a particular scene to give the audience some perspective of what's being described, like this.
The chase was on. The perpetrator sped down the freeway at frightening speeds.
I feel like I'm there. Similar to the way music can be used to evoke certain emotions, sound design can also be used to get your audience to feel something. A powerful tool that can make your podcast memorable and give your listeners a reason to come back for more episodes. Thanks for watching, and if you have any thoughts or tips of your own, feel free to leave them in the comments below. We'll see you in the podcast charts.